Today's video is brought to you by our longtime friends over at Squarespace. Now more than ever, people are getting creative with their time. They're reaching deep into the savings account to start a new business of some kind, or maybe just launch a blog, stuff like that. And the world really is yours with Squarespace as the perfect companion to help fashion a website into whatever you want it to be. It's the platform to use when you're ready to get started on that web project that you've been thinking about. Are you looking to get in and out without thinking too much about what your website should look like? Bam! Use one of their quick, beautiful templates to make a website that's fresh and for you. Or maybe you're more of a hands-on person, you've got lots of opinions and ideas about what exactly your site should look like. Well, Squarespace gives you all of the customization options you could ever want. There's no updates, no patches, no technical BS to worry about. Once you're done setting up your website, tinkering with the design if you are so inclined, or maybe just playing with the colors, there are so many extra features that Squarespace provides so that your website can thrive. Email campaigns, patronage portals, social integrations, member-only areas, analytics, commercial options, 24/7 customer support. It's everything you could ever need in one place. So when you're ready to get started on the next project of yours, big or small, if it involves a website, it's got to be with Squarespace. Right now, you can go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/brainfood to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. And let's get into the video. Winston Churchill once wrote, "In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies." Throughout the Second World War, the subtle art of deception proved time and time again to be among the Allies' most formidable weapons. Prior to the 1942 Battle of El Alamein, the British disguised their tanks as ordinary trucks in order to move them up to the front line unnoticed, while in the build-up to D-Day, through a combination of phony radio traffic, captured German agents, and fields of wooden planes and inflatable tanks, Allied intelligence managed to conjure an entire army division out of thin air and convince the Germans that the invasion force would land not in Normandy, but the Pas-de-Calais. But perhaps the most audacious and bizarre deception of the war was Operation Mincemeat, a macabre undertaking centered around the drowned corpse of one Major William Martin, a man who never existed. By the end of 1942, the Allies had pushed the Germans and Italians out of North Africa and were pondering the next move. Winston Churchill favored an invasion of Italy, which he saw as the soft underbelly of the Axis. And the obvious stepping stone for such an invasion was the island of Sicily. There was only one problem. This route would also be obvious to the Germans, and the mountainous terrain of Sicily strongly favored the defenders. But another possibility was to invade Sardinia and Greece, which would place Allied forces within striking distance of vital Axis oil facilities in the Balkans. If the Germans could somehow be convinced that the Allies were actually landing in Greece, the invasion of Sicily might have a greater chance of succeeding. The task of fooling the Germans fell to Naval Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montagu and Squadron Leader Sir Archibald Cholmondeley of the 20 Committee, an inter-service intelligence organization so named because 20 in Roman numerals is XX or double cross. The bizarre deception plan Montagu and Cholmondeley cooked up was inspired by a document known as the Trout Memo, which had been circulated among Allied intelligence personnel in 1939. While attributed to Rear Admiral John Godfrey, it is now believed that the memo was actually written by his assistant Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond. In the memo, Fleming compared military deception to fly fishing and listed 51 potential deception plans which could be used against the enemy. Deception number 28, which Fleming described as not a very nice suggestion, involved planting false documents on a corpse and dropping it over enemy territory. This in turn had been inspired by the 1937 novel The Milliner's Hat Mystery by former police chief and spy catcher Basil Thompson. Montagu and Cholmondeley believed that a suitably disguised corpse would be the ideal vehicle for leaking falsified intelligence to the enemy, and soon began working on an elaborate scheme codenamed Operation Mincemeat. The task facing Montagu and Cholmondeley was formidable, with many intricate details needing to be worked out. At first, they considered dropping a corpse into enemy territory on a half-opened parachute, but this was quickly abandoned for a number of reasons. First, no Allied airmen would be carrying the highly secret documents that the pair wished to leak. Second, military couriers were not permitted to fly over enemy territory lest they be shot down. And third, any corpse the pair were likely to obtain would be several days old and could never be made to look freshly deceased. Instead, Montagu and Cholmondeley decided to drop the corpse from a submarine off an enemy-held coast, making it look like the body of a man who had crashed at sea and drowned. The pair quickly ruled out disguising the corpse as a naval officer, as this would require a custom-tailored uniform, and instead chose to make him an officer of the Royal Marines, allowing him to be dressed in the standard off-the-rack battle dress. Spain was chosen as the insertion point, as while the country was nominally neutral, it had pro-German leanings and hosted a well-established network network of German spies. The next order of business was to actually find a suitable corpse. While Britain in World War II had no shortage of bodies, nearly all were already spoken for, and making indiscreet inquiries would have raised undue suspicion. According to Montagu's 1953 memoir, The Man Who Never Was, he and Chumley had nearly given up when they happened upon a young man who had died of pneumonia and convinced the family to release his body on the condition that his identity never be revealed. The body was ideal for their purposes, as its fluid-filled lungs would closely resemble those of a man who had drowned at sea. However, in 1996, amateur historian Roger Morgan determined that the corpse actually belonged to one Glyndŵr Michael, a homeless Welshman who died in an abandoned London warehouse after accidentally eating rat poison. As Michael had no next of kin, Montagu had no trouble convincing Bentley Purchase, coroner of St Pancras District, to turn over the body and store it in the morgue until needed. Yet still other historians, such as Ben McIntyre and Anna Puchas, doubt that the corpse could have been Michael's, arguing that his unhealthy and emaciated body would have been a poor match for a young and fit Marine officer. However, they suggested that the corpse belonged to John Melville, the sailor aboard an aircraft carrier HMS Dasher, which exploded and sank in the Clyde River on March 27, 1943. However, Montagu dismissed the need for a perfect physical resemblance, stating, "He doesn't need to look like an officer, only a staff officer." With the body secured, Montagu and Chumley set about crafting an identity for their fictitious officer. Time was of the essence, for the body could only be kept refrigerated for 3 months, after which it would be too decomposed to be convincing. Glyndŵr Michael soon became Captain, acting Major William Martin of the Royal Marines, the surname Martin being chosen as it was among the most common on the Naval Register. This meant that the report of his death could be easily mistaken for that of another real Major Martin. The rank of acting Major was also carefully chosen, as it was high enough to justify him carrying a top-secret document, but not high enough that anyone important would be expected to know him. The documents Major Martin was to carry included a fake letter written by Lieutenant General Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Harold Alexander in Tunisia, outlining the Allies' intent to invade Sardinia and Greece. In an inspired bit of subtle spycraft, the letter did not explicitly spell out the Allied plan, but rather spoke around it in such a way that the true meaning could not be missed. And in a classic double feint, the document was written to imply that the attack on Sicily, the preparations for which the Germans could hardly have missed, was actually a diversion for the actual invasion. To corroborate this letter, Major Martin also carried a letter from Lord Louis Mountbatten, Chief of Combined Operations, to Admiral Andrew Cunningham, introducing Martin as an expert in landing craft being loaned to Cunningham's staff. The letter even contained a joke about sardines being rationed in Britain, a pun so stereotypically British Montagu and Chumley believed the Germans would swallow it hook, line, and sinker. In order to look the part, the corpse was dressed in a standard uniform, a trench coat, and a life preserver. Fearing that the largely Catholic Spaniards would be hesitant to rifle through the corpse's pockets, Montagu and Chumley instead placed the documents in a locked leather briefcase with a chain of the type used by bank couriers, the chain being wrapped around the belt loops of Major Martin's trench coat to prevent it from floating away. However, it would take more than just a name and a briefcase of documents to fool German intelligence. For the deception to work, Major Martin had to appear like a formerly living, breathing human being complete with personal interests, relationships, and foibles. And in this, Montagu and Chumley overlooked no detail, carefully crafting a complete identity through various pieces of litter placed in the corpse's pockets. Major Martin was made to appear somewhat careless in his personal affairs via angry letters from his creditors, unpaid bills, an overdraft statement from his bank, and a stern letter from his father regarding his finances. Even his identity card was a temporary replacement for one previously lost. Martin was also given an imaginary girlfriend named Pam, whose photograph, actually of Montagu's secretary, Jean Leslie, he carried in his pocket. Other secretaries also contributed love letters from Pam for added authenticity. The effect was completed by an addition of a St. Christopher's medal, a matchbook, cigarettes, a bill from Martin's tailor, a receipt for an engagement ring, keys, theatre ticket stubs, and other odds and ends, all carefully coordinated to paint a realistic picture of Major Martin's last days in London. For his identity card, Montagu and Chumley first tried to photograph the corpse, but this proved unconvincing, and they instead used a picture of MI5 Captain Ronnie Reed, who bore a passing resemblance to the body. Major Martin was placed in a specially designed canister filled with dry ice and carried aboard the Royal Navy submarine HMS Seraph, which departed Britain on the 19th of May 1943. For security reasons, the crew were told that the canister contained an experimental meteorological device, with only the boat's captain, Lieutenant Norman Jewell, and a handful of senior officers being informed of the mission's true nature. After being accidentally attacked twice en route by British aircraft, on April the 29th, the boat surfaced off the coast of Hull over in Spain. In the early hours of the next morning, Major Martin's body was brought on deck, and after a brief ceremony where Lieutenant Jewell read from the 39th Psalm, it was placed in the water, the wash from the submarine's propellers being used to push him towards the shore. At around 9 a.m., a Spanish fisherman picked up the body and carried it to shore, where it was handed over to the Spanish Admiralty. The game was now afoot. The Spanish authorities immediately contacted Francis Haselden, the local British consul, and offered to hand over Major Martin's effects. Strangely, Haselden refused, insisting that the items be submitted through official channels. A frantic exchange of diplomatic cables between Haselden and London ensued, with London urging Haselden to obtain the items as quickly as possible. Of course, this had all been meticulously planned beforehand to convince the Germans of the document's authenticity, the British knowing that their diplomatic codes had been broken. Thus, the existence of the body and its briefcase came to the attention of two German agents stationed in Spain, Karl Erich Kuthenthal and Adolf Klaus, who, on the instructions of German intelligence chief Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, attempted to intercept the secret documents. Despite pressure from the Germans, the Spanish refused to hand over the briefcase and instead sent it to the naval headquarters at San Fernando. Here, the contents were photographed, but the letters were not opened. It was not until the briefcase reached Madrid that the Spanish finally acceded to German demands, with a thin metal rod being used to roll up the still damp letters so that they could be removed through the envelope flap without breaking the seal. The letters were then dried, photographed, and re-soaked in salt water before being reinserted into the envelopes. On May the 8th, the photographs were passed to Kuhlenthal, while on May the 11th, the briefcase and its contents were returned to Haselden, who forwarded it to London in a diplomatic bag. Meanwhile, Major Martin's body had been given a cursory autopsy by a Spanish coroner, confirmed to have died of drowning and exposure, and buried in the Hover Cemetery with full military honours. When the briefcase finally arrived back in London, an examination of the envelopes confirmed that they had been opened by the Germans. Not only did the letters curl up into a cylinder when removed, but an eyelash placed in the envelope by Montagu was conveniently missing. Indeed, Kuhlenthal believed the intelligence to be so important that he personally carried it to Berlin, where German intelligence confirmed its authenticity to the High Command. On May the 12th, Adolf Hitler issued an order declaring, "Measures regarding Sardinia and the Peloponnese take precedence over everything else." Confirmation that the Germans had taken the bait came 2 days later, when codebreakers at Bletchley Park decoded a German signal indicating that an entire panzer division of 90,000 men had been moved from Sicily to Greece. Montagu sent an urgent telegram to Churchill, then in Washington, D.C. for the Trident Conference, reading, "Mincemeat swallowed rod, line, and sinker by the right people, and from the best information, they looked like acting on it." The Allied invasion of Sicily, codenamed Operation Husky, began on July 10, 1943. By August 17th, the armies of General George S. Patton and Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery had taken the island at a loss of only 5,500 killed and 14,000 wounded, far less than the Allies had feared. The capture of Sicily led to the collapse of the government of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini and provided a springboard for the subsequent Allied invasion of the Italian mainland, and all largely thanks to the valiant actions of a dead man. What is perhaps most impressive about Operation Mincemeat is how easily the whole thing could have gone wrong. For example, had Major Martin's corpse been examined by a more experienced coroner, it would have been realized that it was missing many of the hallmarks of a body which had been floating at sea for several days, such as crab and fish bites and dull, brittle hair. Fortunately, the Germans were prevented from examining the matter too closely by the need to appear as though they were unaware of the corpse's existence, and they were thus forced to take the Spanish at their word regarding its authenticity. Also fortuitous for the Allies were the specific German agents involved in the case. Kuhlenthal, due to his Jewish ancestry, was overeager to please the German High Command and had a long history of passing on bad intelligence. The intelligence analyst tasked with examining the documents in Berlin, Alexis Baron von Rohen, also hated Hitler and did everything in his power to sabotage the Nazi war effort. Even Admiral Canaris, head of German military intelligence, actively worked against the Nazi regime, meaning it is possible that most involved in the case did not actually believe the ruse at all. But the Mincemeat documents confirmed what Hitler already believed, and whether or not they influenced his decision to move his troops to Greece, that decision was instrumental in the fall of Sicily. In life, he was Glyndŵr Michael, a homeless drifter who died a horrible death alone and forgotten, while in death he became Major William Martin, a war hero who helped secure a vital Allied victory in the Mediterranean. He still lies buried under that name in Westra Sonora Cemetery in Helva, while on the Welsh War Memorial in Aberbargod he is listed as the man who never was, but in Welsh, and I'm not going to try and pronounce that. So I really hope you found today's video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you for watching.